Hello everyone, Joy here again, and today I want to talk about fake genders. But before I do, quick announcement, the interview that I did a couple of weeks ago with the other guy is online, and he's now started his own website, which is a hub for information for events and support networks and things like that for LGBT plus people in Taunton and Somerset area. I'll put a link down in the description to that. Go check it out. I wish him all the best with that because it's really good. So, fake genders. All this list of genders, are they real? Well, I went to do the research. I went onto the Tumblr page and looked at the list of like 1,000 fucking words and meanings, and it made my head spin, not gonna lie. And while I do think that, yes, it's great, we live in a society, well, I live in a society where we have the ability, this society permits us to label ourselves, essentially. But giving a label to a particular feeling and then slapping the term gender on it doesn't necessarily make it true, right? Well, it's seen nowadays as trendy and fashionable to wear one's gender on one's sleeve. And yeah, it's the trouble with that is there's a backlash for people who think that these people are using these terms just so that they can be non-conformist. And it gives the impression that these gender identities might well be fake. So, now gender is not so easily defined as something as concrete as a table or a chair or a book. You know, you can't just point at something and say, oh, well, that's a gender and that's not a gender. It's not that easy. So we have to look at the definition, which is a range of personality characteristic traits linked with sex, not the same as a state of cultural and social differences. Yes, I'm reading notes. Now, it was a sociologist called John Money in 1955 who distinguished biological sex from gender norms. And then in the 1970s, the feminist movement adopted the usage of the word gender to mean the social construct or the self-referential construct of gender identity, roles, and expressions. And yes, sometimes gender expressions are a phase, because gender can sometimes be fluid or static, depending on who the person is. For some people it is, and for some people it isn't. It's just that, just the way that it is. So I, along with the feminists, I'm an advocate for gender neutrality in language in society, and I will talk about that more in a different video. But what essentially that means is use of words like chairperson instead of chairman or even chairwoman, because, again, that sort of discounts the non-binary. So, is it necessary to have 20,000 different terms when the word non-binary will apply and are just as accurate? Well, that's the question. And, okay, so for me, for doing the research, one of the arguments is that for a long time in society, without access to any of these terms, there was only male and female recognised as terms. But this is unsupported by historical evidence, because in other cultures, Native Americans, ancient Egyptians, other world cultures that I didn't research, they do have other terms besides the binary, male and female. They did recognise that there were genders outside of the binary. Now, another problem is this long list leads skeptics to think that people who identify with these labels are just making up problems. just so that they can seem precious and special and snowflakey. I fucking hate that term. And this in turn creates the backlash to an already marginalised portion of society, and it doesn't do any favours for any trans or non-binary people as a whole. And in response to this, some binary trans people have reacted and claimed that there are only two genders because that's their experience. They've experienced MTF or FTM, and they've only lived in the binary. However, just because that's their experience doesn't necessarily mean that it's everyone's experience. So, it does also cause a bit of a problem with inclusion of the LGBT plus etc. abbreviation, because everybody wants recognition within that. But I have already talked about that in a different video. So, how do I feel about this? Well, I have to believe that there are at least 3 genders. There's obviously the male, the female, and the neutral, which is kind of similar to some languages that have grammatical gender. German and Russian, off the top of my head, have those 3. I can't honestly say how many total there are, because I'm not a specialist. I'm just going off my observations and my research. So, I don't know whether to include a gender as a neutral or as a separate thing there as well, because agender by its very definition is the absence of gender, so I don't know if it classes as a gender. These kinds of things are what cause these problems as to people saying what's a gender and what's not a gender. So, and again, I'm not trying to be disingenuous to people who use these labels, definitely not trying to be exclusionary. However, I can sort of see the point of view where, like, society might say, well, look, realistically, on a spectrum of gender, which is how it's a new theory that's sort of being incorporated now that I believe, because it's the best evidence that we have so far, that gender is a spectrum, and but the problem there is society says, well, realistically, how many points can you plot on a spectrum, and how many can you use and define realistically? So, yeah, it does seem like a bit much. And this is coming from someone who self-identifies as a trans, feminine, pangender, non-binary individual. Now, that sounds like a mouthful. What it actually means is, I'm somewhere in the middle. That's what it boils down to. But I need those terms in order to introduce subtle, specific layers of nuance. And that's where the detail lies. For example, trans, even as an umbrella term, still, it's a nuance layer. It's not a gender by itself. You know, trans by itself means nothing. Words rely on context in order to have meaning. So, how can we tell if these gender terms are even valid or genuine? And the way I see it, the validity comes from the presence of gender dysphoria. What is dysphoria? Well, it's categorized as the profound unease or dissatisfaction which leads to anxiety or depression, and it's caused by the mismatch. Gender dysphoria is caused by the mismatch of sex and gender, both behavior and expression. And it's actually more profound in people that have dysmorphia, which is the physical physical self-loathing that arises from dysphoria, which causes people to undergo SRS. But dysphoria can be dysmorphia or it cannot be dysmorphia. The two aren't necessarily the same. So, in society, it happens to be that most people don't experience gender dysphoria, and that's what causes the skepticism, because cisgender people don't need to worry about dysphoria. And again, that, like I said, that can cause the skepticism. Now, again, for me, I grew up with dysphoria. I had society telling me what to do, where to go, literally where to go, how to behave, what to wear, what role models to aspire to, all because of the organs between my legs. And that's clearly wrong. Because, as we should have already established, sex is not the same as gender. So, I don't have dysphoria as much anymore, because I now have the freedom to express myself without society telling me this is good and this is bad and this is what you should do. And also, I have the freedom to not choose to live by social norms that I find arbitrary. So, in conclusion, what I would do to anyone who uses or needs these terms to express themselves or identify with is to tell people to just be kind, compassionately listen when they explain what these terms mean to them, and people who are skeptics, there will always be skeptics, and they can either accept or they can fuck off. Because these terms, they may stand the test of time, they may not, but for now, they have been created, words are created to describe something. They haven't been created just for the fun of it. They are, to coin the phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. They're there for a reason. Whether they are true genders or whether they are layers of nuance and detail within a non-binary gender is really up to the individual. Bye. I'll see you later.